you all for coming. And just before I start, just to let you know, I'm not like texting as I'm talking here. Normally, this is a slide presentation, so I'm going to be kind of looking at my phone to guide me a little bit. So I'm not trying to act like a millennial, like vegan. See, I slip the book in wherever I can. I'm not trying to act like a millennial and like text while we're talking, just so you know. So what I'm going to talk about today is how to navigate relationships as a vegan, to communicate more effectively. Is there any way that music can be turned down? Okay, yeah. It's kind of, you normally don't have bass booming in the background.
Makes it so much cooler.
Right, it does make it cooler, right, yeah. So how to navigate, and basically the topic of the talk is a subtitle of a book that I recently wrote. Called Millennial Vegan Tips for Navigating Relationships, Wellness, and Everyday Life as a Young Animal Advocate. But what I'm talking about today does not really only apply to millennials, because I could tell you as a non-millennial, I deal with many or if not all of the same issues that I'm going to be talking about today. Just how we as vegans or animal advocates need to kind of think about how we're communicating with other people, kind of how to manage our relationships, how to advocate for animals in ways that are both good for us and good for the animals and conducive to having good relationships in general. But I did write this book with millennials in mind because I really wanted to do something to support millennials, millennial vegans in particular, or millennial animal advocates, because, frankly, I'm like totally blown away by young people who go vegan, young people who see past all the ways that we've all been indoctrinated to do harm to non-human animals. And, as most of you are aware, young vegans, and especially the millennial generation, kind of has a raw deal in our society. They have the most education of any generation. They're most likely to graduate from college, but yet they have the hardest time finding a job, right? So in a lot of ways, decisions prior generations have made and the politicians we've elected have kind of, set the stage for problems for millennials. So in spite of all the stuff they have to deal with, they still are disproportionately more likely to go vegan than any other generation. There was a recent study done by the Vegan Society where they found that 42% of all vegans in the UK were in the millennial age range, ages 15 to 34. So that's a really high proportion of vegans are millennials, which to me just kind of blows me away, because I know when I was that age, I was not able to see past all of the ways we've been taught to do harm to animals, all the ways that we're socialized. Myself, and I'm sure many of you here, it took a lot longer for us to make that connection to animals. So I wanted to kind of write something to support millennials. So I have the books there, and if anybody's interested, I'll be signing them after the talk. So throughout the book, I have quotes that are taken from either our own Facebook page at Vegan Publishers or other Facebook groups, etc., that are direct quotes from younger vegans in particular that kind of emphasize some of the things that I'm going to be talking about. So I've asked some volunteers in the audience to read off the quotes. So we have the first one here, if you wouldn't mind standing up and reading it out loud.
When I posted on Facebook page that zoos are unethical prisons for animals, my mother commented, "Without zoos, how would children develop an appreciation for all of these different animals?" This was just after we had a family vacation where I had to watch them all eat animal corpses for every meal the entire week. How's that for animal appreciation? For the first time since I really became aware and went vegan, I'm feeling completely hopeless and alone.
So by show of hands, thank you. You can hang on to it. I don't know do you have the next one? Perhaps. How many of you can relate to the idea of feeling lonely as a vegan because you feel somewhat disconnected from other people around you? Raise your hand if you've ever felt that way. So probably pretty much every vegan here is raising their hand right now. I know I felt that way too, and in some ways it's hard not to feel that way. When you make that connection and you become aware of the harm that we do to non-human animals, and you see it everywhere, and especially, when you see people that you love and care about, who you otherwise know are really good and kind and compassionate people, who are also kind of participating in this, it's bound to lead to some sense of disconnection from others and alienation from others. Also, by show of hands, how many of you have told somebody you were vegan and got a really defensive response? The other person may have said, well, I don't eat animals that much, or I only eat humane meat, or, or you think you're better than me, because you're a vegan, right? So, just by by virtue of living in the world as vegans, we can kind of experience alienation from other people who may feel defensive in our presence. I'm a clinical psychologist by day, and I work in the area of violence prevention. So I have a pretty good understanding of guilt and shame. And I think that's something that happens often, where we as vegans may be talking to other people about animals, or we can just simply say, that we're vegan, and that can elicit a shame response in the other person. And when people feel guilt or shame, often the reactions we get can really range from, defensiveness to outright hostility and more abusive kind of behavior. And that can contribute to feelings of isolation and loneliness from other people in general. So in some ways, veganism can really be almost a social liability, where we feel kind of disconnected from other people. The holidays are another good example where, in the past, maybe the holidays were a time we really felt close and connected to our family members. And now perhaps we'll go and, other people are eating animals all around us. We feel upset, because we're recognizing that these are sentient beings that are, dead on the table in front of us. So there's all kinds of ways in which our veganism I wouldn't say contribute to these problems, but it's a factor in this disconnection with loved ones. And we can often feel kind of disappointed in loved ones and disconnected in general. So I want to talk a little bit about what we do about this. So I didn't come here today to kind of just kind of complain about non-vegans or just kind of moan about our problems and struggles. So I want to talk a little bit about what we do about this. And I think the most important thing to avoid feeling that disconnection from other people is to make sure that we're not keeping in our feelings and that we're not kind of silencing ourselves. So I think it's really important, that we tell other people how we feel. If we have a loved one who is doing things that are upsetting to us, or if somebody's bullying us, or just we want people to understand why our veganism is important to us, I think we should not be afraid to let other people know how we're feeling in the moment. We know that's how we improve relationships. That's how we stay connected with other people, is by expressing feelings, and not only positive feelings. Sometimes, when we express negative feelings, that can also bring us closer to family members. I also think how we think about others is really important. And I personally stay away from pejorative labels for non-vegans. Like, I never call non-vegans carnists, which is a common term that a lot of people use. I don't think it's really helpful to kind of split us up into groups and think, well, we're vegans and everybody else are like murderers, right? I mean, that doesn't really do us any good. That's not helping our relationships, and that's not helping animals in any way. We're not gonna help other people like make the connection about animals if we're labeling them and we're being aggressive towards them. I personally like to think of non-vegans as pre-vegans. It's a nice term, right? Some people complain it's a little bit condescending, but it's better than carnists anyway, right? And the reason I like to think of non-vegans as pre-vegans, including my loved ones and family members, is because it's really a more hopeful perspective. I believe that everybody has the ability to go vegan, and I've seen it with my non-vegan family members. My father-in-law just a couple weeks ago went vegan and totally shocked us all. He's a bodybuilder. He's a 70-year-old bodybuilder, kind of the last person I ever thought was going to go vegan. And out of nowhere, he made that connection. So I believe everybody has the ability to change, and having that more hopeful perspective will help us reach other people with our message of justice for animals and kindness and compassion. So I think of others as pre-vegans, and it also kind of helps us remember the fact that we weren't always vegans ourselves either, right? Or at least most of us were. Very few of us were vegan from birth. I know myself, it wasn't until I was about 30 where I really first went plant-based and ultimately went vegan. So if I kind of think, that, everybody who's non-vegan is a, terrible, like, murderer, then, I have to acknowledge that I was the same way, at one point as well. So I think it's just helpful to keep that in mind. If we want other people to, if we want to have good relationships with other people, I think it's important to have a good balance between acceptance and change. And I know for myself, I let my family and loved ones know that I accept them and I love them, but I don't agree with them consuming animals. I don't agree with them doing harm to animals. So it's finding that balance between, accepting them and while trying to promote change at the same time. I think another important way that we can combat loneliness and deal with depression is to allow ourselves to feel good about ourselves, allow ourselves to be proud of sticking to our convictions. No matter what other people say, no matter what rejection we may experience or bullying we may experience, if we stay true to our convictions and continue to advocate for non-human animals, I think that's something that we can feel good about. And as a psychologist, another thing that we know is that the more that you do good for others, the less likely you're going to be depressed, you're going to be sad and lonely. So that's personally a way that I've kind of dealt with, my own feelings of sadness and, loneliness. And the only reason I'm not like severely depressed today is from the advocacy work I do for animals and the violence prevention work. And I know a lot of advocates who feel the same way. The more that you do for others, the less likely you're going to be depressed and isolated yourself. We all create our own social world, so I think it's also really important to keep others who are like-minded, to build a community of other animal advocates so we don't feel disconnected from other people. So I think events such as this one are really important for creating that sense of, a community of animal advocates where we're all wanting the same things and we all have kind of a similar outlook in terms of ethical beliefs and behavior with respect to non-human animals. Okay, who has the quote, "I just had a very difficult discussion"? Okay, can you stand up and read it? And the mic's right behind you. And try to keep the mic close to your mouth so people can hear.
I just had a very difficult discussion with someone who came up with every excuse in the book for killing and eating animals. Some people are just too uncomfortable with the idea of change that they won't even listen to facts that we lay out for them. So I maintained my good intentions to speak calmly but clearly about my veganism. I have learned so much about veganism recently that I felt like I could deal with all of his rationalizations in a non-confrontational way. And for once, the conversation didn't turn into an argument. And I feel like he was actually listening in the end. I have found that the more calm and genuine I am, the better I'm able to reach others.
Thank you very much. Good job. So that quote illustrates the importance of being assertive with other people. And if there was one skill I could bestow upon every vegan, every animal advocate in the world, it would be how to be assertive with other people. And to be assertive means to find that middle ground between being passive, where you're keeping everything in, you're keeping in all of your feelings, you're sort of silencing yourself, and when it comes to animal advocacy, you're not really speaking out for animals in any way, to going to the other extreme and being kind of aggressive. Can anybody think of any good examples of kind of aggressive comments we often might hear from vegans? Right, calling people a murderer, just kind of calling other people names, getting aggressive, saying like, you need to do this, you need to do that sort of thing. So being assertive means finding that middle ground where you are not being aggressive, you're not jumping down somebody's throat, you're not calling the other person names, and you're not being passive where you're keeping everything in and you're kind of not really advocating for animals. So to be assertive means that you are kind of speaking your own truth, you are clearly advocating for animals or telling others how you feel without kind of stuffing your feelings, but you're doing it in a respectful way. And when you're assertive, not only are you respectful of the other person, but you're also being respectful to yourself because you're not stuffing everything and keeping it all in. Because what happens when you stuff your feelings? Anger, right? It can build up and lead to anger. What else? Depression, yep. Like anger turned inwards is depression. Resentment, yeah, that's a good one. So the more you keep it in, you stew, and you're upset and mad, but you're not telling anybody about it, so you just get more and more resentful of other people. And then what ultimately happens, the more resentful you get, the more angry you get. You blow up, right? And that's what we really want to avoid, right? And that I can tell you, I've done this with my own family early on when I first went vegan. Builds and builds and builds, and then it leads to an argument, which is really not going to help anybody. It's not going to help your relationships, and it's not going to help the animals in any way. So being assertive is really important for talking to others about veganism, talking to others about animals. Part of being assertive also is establishing your boundaries with other people, to letting other people know kind of what your limits are. So for example, if you really don't feel comfortable being out to eat where everybody's eating animals around you, part of being assertive might be to let them know, like, this just really gets me too upset. This negatively impacts our relationships. I'm just not able to do this, so I'm not going to be able to join you today. That's being assertive. There's nothing wrong with doing that. There's nothing wrong with letting other people know where your limits and boundaries are. It may also be to let somebody know if they're kind of teasing you for being vegan, or they're making jokes about doing harm to animals or killing animals, that sort of thing. Part of being assertive is to let them know that that's not okay and that you're not going to accept that. So being assertive isn't always just being like super nice and polite all the time. Sometimes it means like really clearly letting people know that this is not okay. And it also can mean clearly advocating for animals in a straightforward but clear way. So you can be respectful, you can be calm, but you can strongly advocate for animals all at the same time. And in fact, that is the best way to communicate a message. And as a psychologist, this is something that I teach all the time to people that I work with. The best way to get your message across to anybody is to do it in an assertive way where you're clear and calm and rational and respectful. Rather that, when you're aggressive, the other person just kind of shuts down and they're not really listening to what you have to say. They're telling themselves, well, this person isn't really rational or reasonable right now, so I'm not going to listen to what they have to say. And on the other extreme, when you're passive, you're not getting a message out to anybody, right? And actually, after one of my talks or when somebody reads one of my books, what I get most from other people is they'll come up to me and they'll say, I tend to be one of the more passive kind of vegans, and it's something I need to work on because it's hard for me to talk about, animals because of the feedback I get from other people or the pushback that I get from other people. Can any of you relate to that, where you tend to be more passive because of that? Okay, so yeah, and it's really common. And then why do you think that is? Why do you feel like you're more likely to keep things to yourself and not talk about veganism with others? Fear of judgment. Yep. Fear of losing relationships and friendships. Anything else? No chance, right. That's somewhat of a different case, and I think that's a good point. There may be instances where that nothing I say is going to make a difference with this person. Or maybe you've already had that conversation, you've talked about it again and again. I have family members like this, and they know where to find me, right? And they know that I'm ready to have this conversation when they are. But I know talking to them every day about it is not going to do any good. That's a slightly different than what I'm talking about, where people really just kind of more silence themselves and don't speak out, don't talk about veganism at all.
I think sometimes people also just feel so outnumbered because they're going against the mainstream when it's 1.5%
Right.
in the country are vegan.
Right. So he said that some people just feel outnumbered because you're going against the mainstream. The vegans make such a small part of the population.
I fear being quizzed or put on the spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fear being quizzed and put on the spot. Having to defend, right. I think that's a really good point. And I think that the quote illustrates the importance of educating yourself as much as you can about all the rationalizations and justifications that we're going to hear as vegans. So, we as vegans are going to get those questions all the time. And at this point in my life, I've heard every single one of them, right? And I run a vegan, Facebook page with 270,000 followers, and we get a lot of trolls. So I respond to these all the time. And the more that you can kind of learn all the justifications and rationalizations and responses to them, the fewer arguments you're going to get into, the more calmly and assertively you can have these conversations. because this is something that happened to me when I first went vegan too, is that I started to get like these quizzes from family members or these kind of absurd rationalizations, and I didn't have a ready response to them, and I ended up getting into arguments, because I didn't have the response, and I was frustrated, and I was like, that's such an ignorant thing for this person to say, but I didn't have a ready, calm, rational response. So the more we can educate ourselves about these justifications and responses to them, the better. And I do talk about some of these in the book as well. Okay, great. Another thing that I think is really important about, and relates to being more assertive in our communication with loved ones is to use what are known as kind of I statements. Has anybody ever heard of I statements before? So a lot of folks, some of you, maybe, in the mental health area are familiar with it or what have you. I statements are where we're talking about our own kind of personal experiences. And, what we know in psychology when we teach people to communicate better is that it's much more effective to say, I feel hurt or I feel sad than to say, you made me feel hurt or you make me feel sad, right? And why is that? Why is it better to say I feel rather than you make me feel? Right. So the other person will get more defensive if you're kind of pointing the finger saying you. And this goes back to the kind of guilt and shame responses we may see in others. As much as we can limit that shame response in others, the better. And I think the more that we can talk about our own experiences, the better. So I think one of the most effective things we can do as animal advocates is to tell our own stories. So rather than focusing on, like, you need to go vegan because of this, or you need to do this or that, I'll say, well, I went vegan, or I'm vegan because I realize I have no need to be contributing to the harm to other animals. I don't need to eat, excuse me a minute. I don't need to eat animals. We don't need this to be healthy. It's not even good for us. So for me, I just can't justify it for myself. And when I tell people that matter-of-factly, I get a much less defensive response. I get into many fewer arguments than when I say, well, you're contributing to the needless killing of animals every time you eat animal flesh, right? So how we convey that message is really important. So focusing on your own story, I think, can be really powerful. Just some other kind of tips for being assertive in our communication. I think it's helpful to recognize what your triggers are. So, so in our conversations, we get, justifications that people will throw at us, and some of them can really kind of set us off. Can any of you think of any examples? I noticed some of you smiled when I said that. So I think some of you, some came to mind for you right away. Is there anything that somebody can say that will really set you off? Just shout it out if you have anything like that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So we finally moved into our own house, and we could have had our family over for one of our holidays, which my sister had said, well, we want to still eat meat.
Right.
It was really offensive in the moment.
Right.
Right. In a trigger, I could have just jumped down on my sister's car and killed her.
Right. So how did you respond to her?
Well, she actually calmed me down.
She did what?
She kept me calm.
She kept you calm. Good. Okay. Well, that's a good thing to keep in mind that might be a trigger for you, right? When somebody is suggesting that they need to eat animals on the holidays, or that they'll threaten to not see you if they're not able to eat an animal in your presence, right? Which is absurd on the face of it. So good job for being assertive with your family members and letting them know where your limits are. That's a good example. What else? What are some other examples of triggers? Yes.
Especially one person, but a lot of people that I know think that when you're a vegan, you can't get enough protein, especially when you're obsessed.
Okay. Everybody hear that? So the protein myth, that's a trigger for a lot of people because everybody's saying yes and nodding their head. So it's good to be aware of that. So whenever anybody mentions protein, just tell yourself, like calm blue ocean, right? Right. Just tell yourself that this is something that, I need to be mindful of because I may get into an argument with this person, and you may need to take a little break, before you come back and have a clear, assertive conversation about protein and the myths around protein. Yes, there were some other hands raised. Our body craves meat, right. Yeah, exactly. Or caveman ate meat, so I need to also. Or, this is why I have these canine teeth, right? I mean, there's all different rationalizations and justifications we're going to hear that can really set us off. But for you, I think it's helpful to be aware of what is it for you that may set you off, and let yourself know that I may need to take a little break and kind of collect myself before coming back and having a clear, calm discussion about the issue. I also think, to communicate effectively, it's also really helpful to show the other person you're listening to what they have to say, which isn't always an easy thing to do when you're talking about such a passionate subject like animal advocacy. But I think it's really important, and this is a truism of, communication. The most effective way to improve communication is to work on your listening skills. So to show somebody else you're listening is the best way to have them listen to what you have to say. So, just one little, trick that we use in psychology is we use paraphrasing. So when somebody says something to us, when we paraphrase, we're repeating back what they're saying, but using slightly different language. So say something like, so it sounds like you feel like you need to eat animals to get your daily protein intake, right? I mean, that's a good example. Paraphrase back what they're saying, then they feel like you've heard what they had to say, and then you can come back with your assertive message, and they'll be more likely to listen to what you have to say. So, too often, this happens not just in animal advocacy, this happens everywhere. Both people are trying to get their point across to each other. And both people are kind of like, giving a message to the other person. Neither one is being received by the other person. So showing you're listening, I think, is really important. It's also important to learn when to end a discussion, and also at the same time to recognize that we can't always force change. So there will be situations like we were just talking about where we've said everything we could possibly say, and there's nothing else we can say in that moment that's going to move that person any closer to going vegan. And we might just have to say, okay, well, I don't feel like this is really productive anymore. It's been great talking to you, but why don't we pick this up another time, right? As a clinical psychologist, I know that I'm not going to have like breakthroughs with my clients every single session, right? And the same thing as animal advocates. And we can't put too much pressure on ourselves to be kind of like turning everybody vegan all around us, like every single interaction, every single day. So don't put too much pressure on yourself, and just recognize, we can do all that we can do. We can speak our truth. We can advocate for animals. But at the end of the day, it's up to the other person whether they're going to change or not. So it's really not up to me, but it's up to them. And lastly, I think it's important to give others the benefit of a doubt and to try not to assume the worst in others. I think if we have the mindset that other people, just don't care, or other people are just kind of insensitive or what have you, then it's going to be a lot harder to reach them and to connect with them and help them make the changes we want to see. Okay, who has the quote, "I really could use some advice"? Excellent.
Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. I really could use some advice. I'm getting so tired of getting so much abuse from other people when I speak up about veganism. I hate to say it, but some part of me wants to just be quiet about it, even though I know that doesn't help animals, just so the harassment will stop. I want to make people aware of the suffering of the animals, regardless of the fact that I will be persecuted continuously for doing so. I feel like I'm at a crossroads, and I don't really know what to do.
Excellent. Good job. You said that with feeling. I love that. Can anybody relate to that quote at all? Can you experience anything like that? What are some examples that we as animal advocates may experience as abusive from others? Anything? You think of any examples? Yes.
People sort of like sending text messages of your burger or something like that. I feel like it's really
Right. People texting you images of animal flesh, right? Right. Any other examples? And they think it's a joke, right? Well, they may think it's a joke, but usually there is something more kind of insidious beneath it, right? And usually it's because of these like guilt and shame reactions other people have, and they, essentially do these kinds of things as a form of bullying to try to kind of punish us for, caring about animals, right? And for them, it's a joke. For us, it's like animal flesh, and it's a hostile act. Any other examples? Yes.
People have told me that they were going to eat the animals that I didn't eat.
Yep.
And just make up for it by eating twice as much.
Right. Yeah, I hear that one. Has anybody else heard that one before? Because you're vegan tonight, I'm going to eat like 2 dead animals instead of 1, right? That kind of stuff. We're just like kind of like mocking like the needless killing of non-human animals. Any else? Yes.
It's not really bullying, but I've had people tell me before that I'm the good kind of vegan, which I take it means that I don't make them feel uncomfortable about their choices, which isn't really bullying, but makes me really scared to step outside of that good kind of vegan
Right.
box.
So people say that you're the good kind of vegan, right? So you don't kind of step outside of that box. You know, I mean, God forbid we talk about like, you know, ethics or talk about the killing of animals. Like, you know, there's a reason why people do this. Like, there's a reason why there's the stereotype as the angry vegan. And that is because people would like us all to shut up, right? I mean, just like there are these stereotypes for other social justice issues, like the angry feminist or the angry black man. Like, these stereotypes are out there to try to silence movements, to try to keep people from advocating for issues of social justice. So I think we need to be kind of aware of what that is and to be able to label abusive behavior when we see it, and to not silence ourselves and not worry so much about being that, you know, angry vegan. You know, I talk to a lot of folks who are so worried about being thought of as an angry vegan that they really get silenced by it. And I think we have to be careful not to fall into that trap and silence ourselves just because others would like to not be reminded of their own contribution to the harm of non-human animals. So, okay, so how do we, what do we do about this? You know, and first of all, I think it's really helpful to be aware of what abuse is. So abuse isn't just physical violence. You know, and as a psychologist, this is actually my specialty, is preventing violence and abuse and working with perpetrators of abuse. And what I know is that physical abuse is not the only form of abuse. And in fact, psychological abuse and bullying, there's a lot of research that show that these forms of abuse may have even more negative, harmful impacts on the psychological health and well-being of other people. Psychological abuse has been shown to be more strongly linked to problems such as depression and PTSD and other problems in other people. It's even really strongly linked to physical health problems. So we should not dismiss this as just, you know, playful, you know, like, you know, jokes. Like, these are really efforts to try to undermine our psychological well-being, you know, and it can really range in severity, you know, to, you know, like name calling, more kind of coercive behavior, trying to force people, you know, to behave a certain way. You know, I've heard from actually a lot of younger vegans who will describe, you know, their parents as kind of forcing them to eat animals, even though they have these strong ethical convictions where they don't want to be eating animals, that sort of thing. So it really ranges. You know, there's all different forms of abusive behavior. Another form of abuse that people often don't recognize as psychological abuse is when we alienate other people who don't do what we want them to do. You know, so this is something that we as vegans may experience, where our loved ones may alienate us, may tell us, you know, that I'm not coming to your house for the holidays, or you're not invited to my house for the holidays. You know, don't want anything to do with you because that you stand up for animals. So it's helpful to be aware of what abuse is. And then how we cope with it, too, is also really important. I think it's important for us to not be silent about it, to not just, you know, allow it to occur, but to kind of label the abuse when you see it and let the other person know they're being abusive. If it's actual physical violence, you may need to take other steps, you know, take legal steps or call the abuse out more publicly. We need to get help for abuse if we're experiencing it. We need to talk to other people about it. We need to be careful not to internalize the abuse. So if somebody's calling us names, we have to be careful that we don't internalize that name calling and start to say these things to ourselves. I think it's really important that we tell ourselves when somebody's being abusive to us that this is their issue, that they're the abusive person, they're the one with the problem, and this is nothing about me at all. They're the one who has the problem, and I'm not going to feed into it, and I'm not going to let it get to me because this has nothing to do with me. This is really all about them. I also think it's helpful just to not feed into the abusive pattern, to not meet the abuse with abuse of your own. And the best thing to do is really get away from the abuser, to set your limits and get away from the abuse the best that you can and get help for it. Okay, who has the quote, "I need some help coping with my non-vegan partner"?
I need some help coping with my non-vegan partner. He tells me that it's great that I care so much about animals, but he told me not to try to force my beliefs on him. He told me today that he's never going vegan, so I shouldn't get my hopes up. I started bawling right there. Does anyone have any tips on how to deal with anger toward our partners when they are being narrow-minded and ignorant as hell?
Thank you. Can anybody relate to that quote at all? Okay, a fair amount of people can. So I have a section in the book Millennial Vegan about vegan dating, and this is such a tricky issue, and there's all kinds of debate, online about this, especially when one person's a vegan and the other person isn't. It's especially difficult when the couple got together before either one of them were vegan. Then one person goes vegan, the other person hasn't made that change yet, and it's difficult because you didn't have that expectation in the beginning that one was going to go vegan. So this is a really difficult thing to navigate. Of course, we get around this whole issue if we only date other vegans, right? Which is like my first recommendation that I give to people, if you can help it. But that's not an easy thing to do, and that's not what I did because my wife wasn't vegan when we met, and we both pretty much she pretty much went vegan not too long afterwards. So I'm very lucky about that. But what do we do in these kinds of situations where one person changes and the other person doesn't? I mean, this can be really difficult. Does anybody have any suggestions, or how has anybody else navigated this issue? Yes.
Well, I can say I was the ignorant ass. Sorry. So, are there any children here? So I was the ignorant asshole they're talking about. My wife kind of saw the light about 3 years ago. And honestly, people are selfish, so the less you ask them to give up at any certain time, the more likely they are to see the reason, even if the reason is there and just obvious. So how it worked for us was my wife, then girlfriend, was like, this is our home, this is my home. It's just a matter of respect that you wouldn't have animal products in the house, and that's not a huge thing. Well, you can eat meat when we go out. And then it basically just transitioned from there. Like, you can no meat at the house, and then, try not to eat meat when you go out. And then eventually it was just like, oh, yeah, of course, I should just go vegan. This isn't that bad. So as much as it's obvious and convicting to us, and it hurts to see other people not see that kind of obvious truth, taking it gradually is a good thing. At least it was for me. It made it a lot easier.
Thank you for sharing that. How about other folks? How do you deal with it? Yes. Thank you.
We subscribe to one of those mail order things, Green Chef, that's organic and vegan. So it was a wide variety of interesting flavors and easy to do, and that helped make a big jump that way.
Yeah, for some folks, it's like the how to do it may make a big difference. I think your example is a really good one. I'm glad you said that, and I'm glad that you listened to your partner when she talked to you, and I think that makes all the difference. If you feel that your partner is willing to listen and trying to understand, that really gives hope. It would give me hope that this might be something that will work, because it's so difficult when one person has these strong moral convictions and the other person just completely rejects it. One piece of advice that I often see online that I think is terrible advice when it comes to vegan dating, I hear people often say, well, don't say anything to them. Just be quiet about it. Don't tell them how you feel about it. We can't force other people to change, so just keep it to yourself and don't try to change your partner, which I think is really bad advice, because I think, if we feel a certain way, if we feel strongly about something, we should never keep in our feelings. We should always tell the other person how we feel if something upsets us. I do agree with what you said in that, perhaps waking your partner up by playing Earthlings to them every morning might not be the way to go. And if you don't know what Earthlings is, it's depicts pretty horrific, animal slaughter and that sort of thing. So how you do it can make a big difference. So not, yelling at them every day, calling them a murderer, that's not going to work very well, or trying to push too hard. But I do think we should always, let other people know how we feel and why this is something that's really important to us. Okay, I have sort of a trick question for you all. Is it manly to be vegan? Okay. Right. So the reason it's a trick question is because I think it's strong to be vegan, but at the same time, I don't know that we should all be striving to be as manly and hyper masculine as possible. I think there's a little bit too much of that in the vegan world, where vegans are trying to show, well, I can be a macho jerk just like non-vegans can be. that kind of mentality, can lead to problems and needless violence too. But I think we can be, strong, vegans. Our next speaker, Josh LaJohnny, will be a testament to that coming up next. There's all kinds of examples of vegans who are super strong. And when it comes to real strength, there's really nothing stronger than standing up for your moral convictions, no matter what other people might say, no matter what bullying you may experience, no matter what pushback you may experience. So to me, there's nothing stronger than going against the tide and speaking out for others and advocating for the end to violence for others, including non-human animals that there could be. So of course, we can be strong. We're strong, when we stand up for our convictions. Yes.
I also think it's about how you define manly too, because who says that having. I also think it's about how you define the word manly, because who's to say that some people believe that having empathy and feelings and sensitivity, those are manly characteristics. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And yeah, it's just the word manly that I was responding to. So let's talk a little bit about trauma and misanthropy. I think this is an important topic, especially when I'm talking to young vegans. I think we need to be aware of that we as vegans are kind of exposed to trauma all around us, and many of us became animal advocates in the first place, perhaps because we may have been exposed to trauma or needless violence ourselves growing up, and many of us are sensitive to needless violence towards others in general. So when we see needless violence inflicted upon non-human animals, that we really want to advocate for them and do something about that. And when you really make that connection with animals, and you really begin to see the harm and the trauma that we inflict upon animals everywhere you look. All you have to do is turn on the TV, look at any kind of advertisement, or drive down the road, or walk into any non-vegan restaurant, and you're coming face to face with needless violence and needless killing all around you. So this is something that I think we all need to be mindful of, and we need to kind of really kind of take care of ourselves and recognize, like, when we've been exposed to enough trauma that we need to kind of take a break from it or distance ourselves from it for a little while, or get help for it, or get support, or talk to other people about it. So I think that's really important. Leading into that, I think we really need to avoid going to that really dark place. So when we're exposed to a lot of trauma day in and day out, and the needless harm we do to animals, we can go to that really dark place where we just think that other people are terrible. How many of you have been to that dark place before? Raise your hand. So a lot of you are speaking out. Okay, so for the next quote kind of illustrates some of the ways, how we can go to that dark place and what some of the things we may think or say are when we go there. So who has our misanthropy quote? I don't care if what I say offends humans. Oh, yeah. No, I gave this one to you on purpose because I know you're going to do a good job with this one.
I don't care if what I say offends humans, because the animal holocaust is the worst atrocity this planet has ever seen. Screw humans and their feelings. Sorry. I only care about the animals.
Good job. You didn't disappoint. Can anybody relate to that quote? Has anybody heard anybody else say anything like that? Let's start there. Have any of you ever said anything like that yourself? Okay. So what's wrong with that? What's wrong with going to that dark place and having that misanthropic point of view where you don't care about other humans anymore? All you care about are animals. You think people are terrible, and and non-vegans are horrible people, and you don't care about them. You don't care about oppression or injustice they experience. All you care about are animals. What's wrong with that? Yes. Good point. Yeah, the animals need us to care about humans, right? Because if we're not connecting with other humans, we as animal advocates, then we're not spreading the vegan message, right? So if we think that other people are terrible, other people don't have the ability to change, then we're not going to find that little bit of motivation that person might have to want to change. If we want to reach other people, we have to be able to see the positive in other people. We have to have a more hopeful perspective than that really negative, misanthropic perspective. So I think that's really important. And I also think, another problem with misanthropy is that it divides social justice movements. So if, we tell other people, I don't care about your oppression, I don't care about injustice you experience, I don't care about anything else, all I care about are animals, then you're really not reaching out to other advocates, other people who are fighting other forms of injustice. We're not creating an inclusive movement, which I think is a real problem if we want to grow the vegan movement and really ultimately, put a dent in the animal agriculture business. So, well, lastly, I just want to talk, related to this, I want to talk a little bit about anger and how to cope with anger. So this is something that I think is really important for us animal advocates, to help us improve our relationships, to help us advocate for animals in an effective way. First of all, I want you all to know that it's perfectly okay to be angry, right? And this is something, as a psychologist, I run a lot of anger management groups, and I tell my clients, we all get angry. Anger is a normal emotion. And when it comes to animal advocacy, we have a lot of reason to be angry, right? There's a lot to be angry about. When we're seeing the needless killing of others all around us, it's okay to be angry. But really, it's what we do with that anger that's important. It's being aware of that anger and learning how to channel it in the right direction. So again, to take time outs when we need to, but also to understand what the feelings are underneath the anger. So if we're dealing with loved ones, to let them know, not just that we're angry, but maybe we feel sad, or maybe we feel hurt, or maybe we feel frustrated. There's almost always something underneath the anger and those are the most important feelings we need to convey to other people. Lastly, again, to try not to assume the worst in other people. And this is not an easy thing to do for any of us. Any of us exposed to trauma, we're going to be more likely to kind of assume that people have bad intentions rather than good intentions. But I think if we want to manage our anger better, if we want to have better relationships with other people, again, it's really helpful to try to assume the best in other people rather than assume the worst. Try to assume that other person might be interested in changing rather than assuming that person is hopeless. And I think that will really go a long way towards you managing your own anger. So I think that's a good place for me to stop, and I could take a couple of questions or comments before we finish up. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering, you talk about the different kinds of reactions, verbal and psychological. I imagine there's quite a bit of that. But I'm wondering, compared to actual physical angry reactions from non-vegans, how prevalent that is compared to the others.
So your question is actual physical aggression among vegans. That is something I haven't seen a whole lot of, but I'm non-vegans against vegans. Well, you certainly see it in demonstrations and that sort of thing. And in some odd cases, you may see vegans being aggressive as well. I find it doesn't happen too often, but it certainly happens, more in the area of direct action. Wayne Chung is going to be a speaker here, and he definitely could give you some examples of aggression he's experienced. So that definitely is something that happens more often than we'd like. Yes, where is the other microphone? Oh, great. Do you mind passing it back?
So my experience with mental health professionals is that they often oppose a vegan lifestyle if you have suffered from an eating disorder of any sort, and they view it as a restriction and a way for the disorder to kind of like mask itself and live on. And I'm just wondering if you have anything to say about that.
That's a great question. Actually, thank you for the opportunity to plug my book again. But, there's a chapter in Millennial Vegan written by a man, actually a local man, Justin Van Cleek, who some may be familiar with. He runs the Triangle Chance for All Sanctuary. Actually, it's not too local. It's the Triangle area, and he wrote a chapter about his own eating disorder. So he had anorexia himself, and he talks about how for him, veganism was kind of a way that he overcame his eating disorder. And I think we need to be mindful of it. There are some people who maybe don't understand veganism, and they go on a restrictive plant-based diet because of an eating disorder. So it's something that we have to be aware of. But when somebody goes vegan, really vegan is about ethics. So if somebody is vegan, based on ethical considerations, I have found that there's no link between caring about non-human animals and having an eating disorder. The two don't really go together.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, working to help others, like I was just describing, doing something where you feel like it's impactful and meaningful, trying to make a difference for animals is a great way that many of us cope with negative feelings, and it's a way to prevent depression and other negative feelings. So I think it's complicated, but it's an important issue that I think is relevant for a lot of folks. And I have had young vegans email me saying that their parents wouldn't let them go vegan because they're accusing them of having eating disorders that they don't really have, and it's a big problem. Other questions or comments? Yes.
So I have a question about being assertive and setting boundaries. So one thing that I deal with a lot within my circle of friends and family, there's unfortunately a lot of hunters and backyard slaughter hobbyists. And they post a lot of pictures on Facebook of these activities, and I find it really upsetting to be scrolling through and, these pictures come up. So I've never said anything about it. I end up just hiding them, not unfriending them, but hiding them so it doesn't come up. And that means a lot of my sister and brother-in-law and stuff are not, and I don't know if I should just continue just being quiet about it, just hide them, or if I should let them know that, how this affects me and that this is the consequence, and let them know that if they want to still, for me to follow them on Facebook, they have to stop this behavior. I've never really known what to do. So far, I've just been quiet about it.
So I really appreciate that comment, and I'm not going to stand up here and tell you exactly what you should do. As a psychologist, it's okay. I have a 4-year-old too. She usually likes to run circles around me when I speak at VegFest. So, there's no right or wrong answer, and I'm glad you asked that question, because there's no one right or wrong way to deal with any of these kinds of things, and it's really all up to you, and it's how you feel. If you feel like this is something that you need to let them know because it's something that you feel like you're keeping in, and you want to let them know, why you're not able to follow them, or why your interactions are with them, then I think you should let them know. So it's an individual decision. 'Cause people ask me questions all the time, like, should I go to my family's house for the holidays, And I don't necessarily give hard and fast rules. I say it's up to you, and you have to know where your limits are, where your boundaries are. For myself, I don't go anywhere where I'm going to be witnessing people I care about, like eating animals or doing harm to animals. I won't follow anybody who's constantly posting dead animals on their page, because it is upsetting to me. I may or may not let them know. If I feel like I really want to let them know, if I feel like it's important to me, then I will. Otherwise, I just let it go by, or I just unfriend them or unfollow them. So there's no hard and fast rules about it. We'll take one more, and then I think we should probably stop, and maybe I'll sign a few books as the next speaker comes up. Yes?
So I just have a comment. One thing people sometimes in the past have always talked about and debated about is whether human nature is inherently good. And from my perspective, I think that, and some people may not agree, but I think that there are people that are basically sadistic, amoral sociopaths that lack any sort of moral and ethical conscience. But however, there is a but. I do think that there are also people that don't know how to deal with the cognitive dissonance that they experience, and because deep down they can be reached, because they do deep down know that it's wrong, and and that they do, so they rationalize, and they may get defensive or lash out at vegans because they don't know how to. They're experiencing that cognitive dissonance because
Thank you. I could take it there because I know where you're going from that, and I'm glad you said that because it gives me an opportunity to end on a positive note. So as a psychologist, I work with violent men. I work with domestic abusers, and oftentimes they are, kind of thought to be psychopaths. And it's something that, as a psychologist, I work with a lot of people who are thought to be totally hopeless. They're hopeless psychopaths. And what I often find is at the heart of their violence, at the heart of their aggression, is a lot of trauma and a lot of defensiveness and cognitive dissonance. So I find that even somebody who it seems like they're totally hopeless, If you can find a way to reach them, if you can find a way to connect with them, if you can get beneath some of the trauma, some of the defensiveness, you can reach somebody who you feel like there's no chance at reaching them. And that's what I found to do, and that's what I encourage all of you to do, to go out and find the psychopaths in your life and try to help them go vegan. So why don't we end there? Thank you all. And we have Josh Lajani next, so he'll come up. And if anybody's interested in books, I'll be right over here. Thank you. I'll be right over here and signing books. And if we need to, I can walk you over to our table as well.